Well, for more on the relief efforts in the Philippines, we're joined by Hossam El-Sharkawy. He's the International Director of Emergencies and Recovery for the Canadian Red Cross, and he's here to tell us more about what the Canadian Red Cross is doing to help those in need there. Mohammed, thanks for taking the time to speak with us. I understand that you just got out of a meeting about the Philippines. What are you hearing?
It is just as you have reported. It is devastating. There is a lot of need on the ground. There are desperate conditions in many areas. Many areas have not been accessed yet by the relief teams, the rescue teams, or the assessment teams. This is big. The life-saving interventions are beginning to be launched for the areas that we are able to access. Canadian Red Cross is sending in an assessment team to support the Philippine Red Cross as we speak. And our field hospital is on standby now, ready to go in the next 48 hours or less, perhaps, depending on where it is designated to be set up.
Mohammed, you said this is big. I know you deal with a lot of crises around the world. What makes this one so big?
There are 4 million people that have been affected by this. Affected means people have lost their homes, their livelihoods, they've been injured, families have been split. Infrastructure has been destroyed in many communities. 4 million in a period of 24 hours affected is huge. And this is certainly reminiscent of the 2004 Indonesia tsunami that we have observed and we continue to respond to. So it is not only about the life-saving interventions which are needed now and for the next few months, it will be years of recovery and rehabilitation in those areas.
Hossam, what supplies are needed most right now?
In this situation, it's emergency medical assistance at first, it's water, it's shelter and food. This is what we are prioritizing, and this is what the Red Cross now globally is launching, including the Canadian Red Cross.
Now, Hossam, you've led teams in disaster areas like this before. Are there some of the initial steps that you take when you arrive to an area that's been hit by a disaster like this one?
Absolutely. First of all, you have to remember that the locals, the local first responders, the local authorities, the Philippine Red Cross have been responding now for 3 days, despite the devastation and despite the lack of supplies and resources. So as we arrive now as internationals in the next 24 to 48 hours, they're typically exhausted and they're welcoming the support and help, which will continue to flood in the Philippines. It needs to be coordinated. We need to set up different sites and access remote communities that may have not been even visited yet. So it's multiple things happening in parallel to ensure that we reach the most vulnerable. Typically in these situations, it's really a lot of women and children that are desperately affected and desperately needing help, and we need to get to, and in remote communities.
In the last few hours, Hossam, we've been hearing reports of looting in some areas. How does that impact relief efforts?
Those types of reports tend to be exaggerated. Of course, some of these things happen. My experience over 20 years now doing disaster response is that those are, in fact, very exceptional events. What we observe, in fact, is the exact opposite. It's the communities rallying, neighbor to neighbor, village to village, helping each other and supporting each other and securing assistance where it's needed. I know some of those images of looting may tend to dominate perhaps the media sometimes, but they are by no means representative of what we see year after year of disaster response.
Hossam, on our website, I've seen Canadians really reaching out, asking what they can do. Do you have any advice?
Yes. Canada is generous. The Canadian government has already contributed and will contribute more. The Canadian public, we urge to go to redcross.ca and please contribute to our appeal to the Philippines. We will be there in the next few days. We already have made some donations to the Philippine Red Cross. Our teams will be arriving over the coming week, but we know we'll be there for the many, many years to come. Even when this story disappears from the news, the recovery and rehabilitation will take a long, long time.
Hossam, you are doing very important work, and we thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Hossam El-Sharkawy is the International Director of Emergencies and Recovery for the Canadian Red Cross.